There we go. All right, well, welcome everybody. We're so happy you can all be here for this Exploring Japanese Rice Flour event with the RBA. My name is Marissa Veely. I am RBA's Certification and Education Director here. And we're very excited to be featuring two of RBA's certified master bakers, Leanne Adams and Joshua Eldorado. For those of you who don't know, our CMBs, it's an incredibly honorable title. The certified master bakers at RBA go through a really intense process of testing. It's a 200 question written exam, a baker's math exam, and then a 2-day intense practical exam that challenges not only their skills and techniques, but really challenges and puts to test professionalism and organization skills as well. So we are really proud of RBA's CMBs. So thank you, Chef Leanne and Chef Joshua, for being here and sharing your expertise. I'll quickly introduce our two CMBs today, and then let them share their wonderful insights with you. First, we have Chef Leanne Adams, who is coming to us from Altoona, Pennsylvania, where she is the R&D manager of baking and ready-to-eat foods at Sheets. So she manages an enormous operation there. Prior to working at Sheets, she worked as a professor at the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park. She was also the executive pastry chef at Pennsylvania State University, among many other places. Leanne gives so much of her time to RBA. We're incredibly grateful all the time for Leanne's input. She mentors our CMB candidates and works as a lead judge on all of our certification exams. So she is incredibly knowledgeable, and we are very lucky to have her here today. We also have Chef Joshua, who's coming to us from Colorado Springs. He's also a certified master baker. He earned his title in 2020. He's worked at various bakery locations from Florida to Colorado, the Ritz-Carlton Naples. He attributes to the location that gave him the opportunity to not only strengthen his knowledge in baking, but also gave him the passion for baking as well. After becoming a lead baker there, he was recruited by the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado. He held the position of executive baker before pursuing the even bigger challenge of owning his own bakery. So currently he is the president and head baker of his own wholesale bakery, Delicious Bakery in Colorado Springs. So welcome you two. We are so excited to have you here. Today we are exploring the topic of Japanese rice flour. Now, rice has been produced in Japan for over 3,000 years. And in lots of parts of Asia, rice flour has been a staple in a lot of their baking preparations. But in the United States, it's a more recent trend, especially with the movement to alternative grains and also avoiding gluten. Lots of bakers are interested in this topic of using rice flour. So I'm going to pass it to Chef Adams first, who has two wonderful recipes. I'm going to share my screen so you can see her recipes here. There you go. Here's Chef Josh and Chef Leanne. And then here is our first recipe by Leanne. I'm going to let you go through that, Leanne.
Okay, this is a fairly traditional Scottish shortbread recipe. There's a few modern tweaks to it, but the rice flour is mixed with pastry flour in this, and it's not noted on the recipe, but it's white rice flour unless you really want brown rice flour, but traditionally it's white rice flour. And it adds a couple things to the shortbread. It adds a textural quality to the shortbread. You can actually, your palate can pick up the particulate of the rice flour. So you get a little more texture. It adds a nutty flavor, and it brings the gluten content down as well, since what Marissa said, rice flour is gluten-free. So you're reducing the structural integrity making it a little easier to break apart and have a shorter texture. The things that are a little different on this recipe from a very traditional Scottish shortbread, I'm using confectioner's sugar or 10x sugar. It's a finer sugar, and I'm not mixing this a whole lot, so it helps to easily incorporate. It doesn't have to be broken down during the creaming process. And I'm throwing an egg yolk in there. It's for richness and flavor. And depending on what recipes you're looking at, traditional shortbread recipes, the salt's even an additive from a traditional recipe. And if you read through the method, the butter and sugar should just be combined. I've worked with shortbread recipes where it tells you to cream them extensively for a couple of minutes. This one is less like a cookie and more like a Scottish shortbread if you do this. And if you can manage to do it with cold fat, even better, because the colder the fat, the less you're able to cream it and aerate it. So if you can work with cold fat, yay. Get the yolk in, add the flours and the salt. Again, don't overmix it. These are shortbread petticoats, and that term refers to Elizabethan England when this shape of shortbread was to look like a woman's petticoat. So you put them into a pie tin and you divide them into however many pieces, 6 or 8, whatever you're looking for, and dock them. You want to use a fork to dock them so that you get any air out that's trapped in the shortbread, and it doesn't dome up during baking. Traditionally, that's in a decorative pattern. Low heat oven. You want the edges to just start to brown. And if you're making a thick shortbread, you may want to drop that oven temp about halfway through. You don't want them overly browned, but you do want them done in the middle. And that one takes a little bit of practice to make sure you're getting the middle done, that you're playing with your oven temp to get that mix of just barely colored on the edges, the middle's done. And as soon as they come out of the oven, they get sprinkled with granulated sugar. So they get a light dusting that'll adhere to the shortbread. And then once they're cooled, you can cut them apart on the score lines. And they're stored usually at room temperature in an airtight container, but you can freeze them. So there's your Scottish shortbread. I don't know if anybody has questions on Scottish shortbread. I made them this Christmas.
Feel free, anyone, to unmute and ask questions.
Yeah, I love questions.
Yeah.
Marissa and Bernadette know this. I love questions, so you can ask me anything. Good. Okay.
Oh, Leanne, I have a question. I've never baked with rice flour at all.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have a preferred brand where like I could buy a small amount of it before we get started with it?
What I have at home is from Bob's Red Mill. But if you're just starting, I would say start with white rice flour. And you don't want glutinous rice flour for this. So there's 2 types of rice flour. There's glutinous and non-glutinous, and that name is really confusing. It doesn't mean it has gluten. Rice flour does not have gluten. It just means that glutinous rice flour comes from sticky rice, and it has a gelatinous quality to it. And non-glutinous white rice flour is what you want to use in most baking applications. So as long as you're not getting glutinous rice flour, you should be fine. Not that I own stock in Bob's Red Mill. I'm not saying that's the only place you can get it. That's just what I have at home. And I know it works. So I can give you kudos on that one.
Also, Patty, after the event, we're going to be sending out to everybody a list of different Japanese rice flour brands as well that you can access. It's at the end of the slides here that I have. And then also you'll be receiving your free sample as well.
Okay, gluten-free white cake. This one has, if you read through it, we've got white rice, potato starch, guar gum, albumin, brown rice flour, potato starch, tapioca starch. There's an enormous list of gluten-free starches or flours in this recipe. And what's going on here is each one of them has a quality that adds to replacing a gluten flour, a wheat flour. But if you were to rely on just one of them, you tend not to get enough things that get you through replacing gluten. So you'll often see gluten-free recipes with a mix. The other thing is some of these have a flavor to them. I know rice flour has a little bit of a flavor. It's pretty mild. Brown rice flour has more, but you start getting into guar gum. Guar is pretty powerful stuff. Soy flour, if anyone's worked with soy flour, that one has a distinct flavor. So you can also blend for flavor. So that's why the list is here with multiple flours and starches. Albumin, if you're not familiar with that term, is dried egg white powder. You can get it at the decorating section of just about anywhere. I mean, Walmart will carry egg white powder. So all of those, that's your gluten-free starch mix. Salt, high ratio shortening. If you're familiar with the brand Sweetex, is high ratio shortening. If you read through, there are 2 skim milk applications, and they're both at room temperature along with liquid egg whites. And that's to help bring the mixture together. If those things were cold, it would interfere with bringing everything together properly, and you would have some issues. So it's worth warming those up. Don't skip that step. And this one's, it's actually a pretty easy mix. It's a large recipe. It's a 20-quart mixer recipe. But if you're familiar with a high ratio mixing method, this is basically high ratio mixing method. So you start with the flours, the baking powders, the salt, and the shortening with a paddle and create a paste. Then you're going to start adding liquids and scrape and mix after each addition and incorporate your liquids that way. If you were to do it like a traditional cake mixing methods where the sugar and the egg whites would start and then you'd start adding the liquids, by the time you got to the flour, this thing would be a broken mess. So you actually flip it on its head and do a high ratio mix where you start with the flours. There's also a specific gravity check. If you're unfamiliar with this, I can explain it to you, but we're looking for 0.91 or 91%. Not a lot of aeration to the batter, just a little bit. And we're going in at 365 and you want to vent halfway through. There's a lot of liquid coming off this cake. So venting helps it. And if you touch the center of the cake, it'll spring back when it's touched. Questions?
What's the
Hi.
desired final texture of the cake? Springiness,
It reads like a traditional high ratio white cake, or most of the box cakes that you're familiar with, box cake mixes are high ratio based mixes. So it's that kind of texture. I'm sorry, Marissa, I meant to send you pictures of this and I didn't. Sorry, but this is, it looks like a traditional high ratio cake.
Got it.
Yes.
Leanne, do you find with the cake that achieving the specific gravity of 91% is any more challenging with the rice
Okay,
flour?
could you see if she could come back? I'm trying to listen to a
No,
Zoom meeting, so, okay. Thanks.
Okay.
no, I don't think 91's hard to get. This mixes like a high ratio cake. You notice very little difference in it. And again, I said, if your liquids aren't at room temperature, you're going to notice some curdling. And if that happens, you need to warm the whole thing up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Put it over a double boiler or in a bowl of hot water and try to bring the temp up gradually. But when working with it, it works like a high ratio mix. It's really pretty easy to work with. The worst part is just sifting, getting all of your starches together. And I'll warn you, don't breathe it in while you're getting all of that together. Nobody wants to inhale guar gum. Don't breathe it in. Guar gum's a little aggressive.
Does anyone else have any questions for Chef Adams before we continue on? All right, Josh, you are up next with your rice flour beignets.
Okay.
Just let me
So,
know when you want me
welcome.
to move forward, Josh, because I have all those pictures for you.
Okay. So vignettes on it was from my point of view the best approach to work with the bright flower. Thinking that we don't need the gluten that we normally get from the regular wheat flour, and going with the traditional parachute kind of mix, it helped achieving that the vignettes that we're trying to do. So it was a little challenging at the beginning. I had to do a couple of trials to get it right, because at first I start cooking the rice flour with the water, with the warm water, but then I start getting too dry. So I just got it nice and hot, dump all the rice flour, and then take it out of the heat without creating the skin that we normally get on the parachute. Because if not, then you get a grainy texture inside the vignettes. And sometimes depends on the baker and where you're baking. You might need to add, after adding the eggs, a little bit more rice flour, and it won't hurt the paste, and you can get the right consistency. That it can be a little tricky. And then another thing I noticed that you have to really fry them really dark. Uh, if you try to go too light, like a normal vignette, it will just stay doughy. In the middle, you will get a big pocket hole, and the dough on one side. So as you see there, when we first started adding the eggs and the final paste. Oh, another thing, the way because it's not a dough like a beignet, I treat it like a parachute. And in order to get the rice, the nice round balls, I pipe them on a parchment paper with spray, and then knock down the tip like we normally do for a cream puff, and then just cut around it with a blade, and then dump in the fryer each individual beignet with the paper, and then just have to rescue the paper once it come up. But I love the texture. I think the crunchiness you get out of the rice flour is very unique and very different from your normal wheat flour. For this, for the vignettes, I use the organic rice flour sample we got, because we have the highest content of amylose, and that helps creating a little bit more structure and expand a little better when you're frying it. Any questions on the vignettes? Another thing that can be done that I've seen other people doing when trying to do gluten-free vignettes or donuts, instead of using baking powder, you can do a little mix of yeast and water and add it at the last stage of mixing, and that gives it more of a yeasty flavor to it, but mostly for flavor, not for volume. Okay. If anyone have any questions about this one, feel free to ask.
They look great.
Okay. This one had the pumpkin cruller. This was quite interesting to make, since I wanted to get a real pumpkin flavor to it, but following the same technique as the vignettes or the parachute. But in this case, instead of using water, I compensate the water content from the pumpkin puree and use it as a base for the recipe. So at the beginning, we just warm the pumpkin puree with the butter, and then add the rice flour. And it becomes like a thick, very thick, very smooth paste And then just put in the mixer, the same process as the parachute. Once it's a little cool down, start adding the eggs one at a time until you get the right consistency. And if you notice, I have some rice flour and baking powder in the last stage of the process to compensate for the heaviness of the starches in the pumpkin puree. Not kind of the weight of sheeting to make the parachute, but it's such a dense paste that I think it helps a lot with the airiness of the cooler. But very good. And then if you put a little bit of maple syrup in the glaze, the flavor is amazing. And again, if you want to play with the spices that you want to add, more allspice or nutmeg, it's up to you. But it's more like a pumpkin pie flavor.
And also everyone that's here, I'm going to send out a packet of these recipes to you all after the event, so you don't need to scribble down as we go here.
So you see how thick it looks, the paste when we're cooking the water with the rice. And again, just for the rice flour to absorb all the moisture from the pumpkin puree and the butter. And there's a process of the frying. I will even go darker on those coolers. I think that was one of the first tryouts. They were a little doughy, so I will go a lot, a few shades more darker.
How did you find that the donuts held, Chef, like over time compared to traditional donuts?
Really, they didn't last that long in my house.
They were so good, they all disappeared.
Yeah, no, yeah. My kids, I have a two-year-old boy, and he loves them. He killed them.
Good taste test.
But that's one of the advantages of the rice flour, that it's very friendly. If you don't glaze them right away, you can store them in a Ziploc bag or a container, and then just warm it up in the air fryer, and it's just like coming out of the fry. Okay, and tiger bread, one of my favorite breads. Since I wanted to make something that had to do with bread, and the black rice flour, I found it very interesting, very appealing. The flavor, the nutmeg flavor in it is amazing, and then the color that it brings to the bread is gorgeous. And again, this is a very simple recipe. It calls for cream cheese. It gives it a nice and soft texture, and then it's a nice soft roll, but with the crunchy topping from the black rice flour. One of my favorites, no doubt. And that's the process. I think I did this one's 1.5 ounces, so a little bit on the big side. But so on the paste for the topping,
Sorry.
that's what we use. No, you good. For the topping, it needs to be nice and smooth, a little bit runny, but not too much. If it's too runny, then it would just drip and coat the whole roll. You want to have just a top, almost like concha. So see, once it bakes and get the oven springs in the oven, it cracked, beautiful.
They're so pretty, Josh. Turned out great.
Thank you.
We all wish we could taste them.
Yeah, they were delicious. And such a difference between the regular white rice flour from the black rice. Very interesting. I would love to get more samples of that one because it's really nice, really nice.
And then everyone will receive this to see about different Japanese rice flour samples as well. Then I'll email to everybody after the program. And then of course, everyone will also receive, their samples as well. So thank you. Does anyone have any questions about the amazing recipes that Chef Leanne and Chef Josh just shared with us?
Hey, Marissa, I don't know if you got emails from me. I did send you a picture of the white cake. If you could just throw it up real quick.
Send me a picture of the rice.
Yeah.
Let me see.
Or can I share from my screen?
You might be able to.
Let me pull the photo up real quick.
While Leanne is looking for that, can I ask just a real question, brief question? So if you're a retail baker and you're, using regular flours and things, what is the advantage to switching to rice flour? Like, are there cost advantages, taste advantages? I know that gluten-free is super important, and obviously that's a huge trend for a lot of great reasons. But I'm just curious, is there, like maybe Chef Adams and Chef Josh, if you wouldn't mind just speaking to that a little bit about what would make it so great for a retail baker?
So from my point of view, I think the stilling process is a little slower, and when you want to refresh it, it refresh a little better. But again, but the texture difference between the wheat flour and the rice flour, it brings a different component to the bread and makes it kind of unique. And for some point, at some point, a good selling point. I think very unique compared to other bakeries and other breads that you would try from a regular retail store.
Thank you.
One of the things I noticed when playing around with it a little bit is, that it's so neutral in flavor. It was interesting when baking with it, the aroma is very strong. You can tell it smells like cooking rice, but then the actual flavor profile is incredibly neutral. So I found that very interesting. Leanne, I have your pictures here as well.
Yeah, because it says you've disabled me being able to do this. So
sorry.
If you could throw the photo.
Let me share.
Thank you.
Yeah. Here's the first one. You can see the cake. Can everyone see the cake here?
Yeah, so I mean, looking at the cake, to me, that's a high ratio cake. I don't see anything that screams, oh my heavens, you've made a gluten-free brick.
Mm-hmm. And then I have the other one I can share too, Leanne.
Yeah, the other one is a variation on this. I tweaked it to make a coconut cake with a coconut cream cheese icing on it. But you can see cake's a pretty good. I mean, in my opinion, it's a pretty good looking cake. Thank you, Marissa, for throwing them up.
Yeah, it looks light and beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna open it up. Say that again, Leanne?
I was just going to talk to Patty for a second. Adding on to what Josh said, for a retail baker contemplating using rice flour, it allows you to drop the gluten percentage on a flour you're using. So, and any of those gluten-free starches will work. But like Josh said, it has a textural component. I think it has a little, maybe it's a little more to the brown side. I think it's got a little nutty flavor. And again, it adds something to it that a wheat flour isn't adding. So, you can bring a distinctive thing to your mix in. It allows you, like, if you're looking at pastry flour, you're like, oh, it's just a little tough. You can start adding these flours in and get to the strength level you want for what you're doing. You don't have to live with the flours that come in the bag.
So you'd sort of recommend it as something to pair with other wheat flours, kind of adjust to your own kind of catered
Yeah, if that, if
strength.
yeah, if you're trying to bring the strength down, and I'm with Josh, I like that textural component that comes with it. I think it adds a really neat character to what you're doing. And Josh, I wanted to ask you on your crawlers, did you ever try making that into shoe paste and baking off anything?
Again, the cruise.
The crawlers, did you ever try that mix as a traditional shoe paste mix?
No, I didn't have enough flour at the time.
Yeah, I'm wondering
But
if I want to try it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it should behave almost like a, but I don't know with the baking process
Longer.
how it would work. Yeah, it's gonna take a lot longer to cook all the way through. And probably start at a higher temperature.
Thank you.
But I also love using rice flour for my proofing baskets or the canvas for making baguettes. Since it won't create big chunks of flour or moist flour.
Yeah.
It helps a lot the releasing of the bread from the baskets.
I'm curious if any of the attendees have played with rice flour and have ways that they apply it. Maybe. It's an interesting concept to be able to do the pâte à choux and bake the pâte à choux as well and be able to do applications like that. Any questions from anybody?
They're waiting for their sample, then they'll
All
try
right,
it.
yeah. We'll have to reconvene after the samples are sent out.
Right.
See what everyone's come up with.
Right. This was great, Marissa, and thank you, Chef Leanne and Chef Josh. It's just really great when we can get together and kind of use different products and talk them through and see the formulas and things like that. It's always really helpful. So thank you.
All right. Well, if no one has any questions, we will.
There is one, sorry, Marissa, there is one question in the chat.
Okay.
Do you encourage to use the rice flour in general?
Yeah. I like
Yeah,
rice flour. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many products you can make with it, from mochi to crullers and beignets. Also, frying, I think, is one of the main that I've always been used to have, like we call almojábanas. It's a Puerto Rican kind of pastry, but we use a more coarse rice flour. That's why I didn't make it for this samples. But the texture, we use cheese on it as well, and it's amazing. The texture, I always love it. My grandma used to make those fritters all the time, and it was amazing. Always bring me good memories. And it's another challenge for bakers that want to bring their baking to the next level and not just stick with wheat flour.
Great. Well, thank you again, Chef Leanne and Chef Josh. And thank you for sharing those creations with us. As I said before, everyone who's attended the event will be sending out free rice flour samples. I'll be sending out all of those great recipes. So be on the lookout for those emails from me. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.